In 2 Kings chapter 13, there's a young king that realized that he was in need, that he needed help. He was very aware of his lack in the moment. Let's read this text together. 2 Kings chapter 13, starting in verse 14, it says this: Now Elisha was suffering from the illness from which he died, and Jehoash, king of Israel, went down to see him and wept over him. My father, he cried, the chariots and horsemen of Israel. Elisha said, Get a bow and some arrows, and he did so. Take the bow in your hands, and he said to the king of Israel. And when he had taken it, Elisha put his hands on the king's hands. Open the east window, he said, and he opened it. Shoot, Elisha said, and he shot. The Lord's arrow of victory, the arrow of victory over Aram, Elisha declared. You will completely destroy the Arameans at Apec. Then he said, Take the arrows, and the king took them. And Elisha told him, Strike the ground, and he struck it 3 times and stopped. And the man of God was angry with him and said, You should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times, and you would have defeated Aram and completely destroyed it, but now you will defeat it only 3 times. And that very next verse, verse 20, says, Elisha died and was buried. It's an interesting passage of scripture tucked away in the Old Testament. There's layer after layer that you can pull out of this text. But before we get to what we're talking about, the points in verses 14 through 20, I want to pull out a very telling verse as you look up ahead in the chapter, verse 7. It says this, it's pretty telling of what's going on in chapter 13. In verse 7, it says this, that nothing had been left of the army of Jehoaz except 50 horsemen, 10 chariots, and 10,000 foot soldiers. For the king of Aram had destroyed the rest and made them like the dust at threshing time. See, Jehoaz and his army, Jehoaz was Jehoash's father. And when he died, Jehoash became king, and he recognized that things aren't quite right, that things weren't really what they needed to be. And I'm sure at that moment when he took a look at the kingdom that was now his, he probably took a moment and looked back at what the kingdom was and what the state it was in currently. And I'm sure growing up in the palace household, that he had heard about the accounts of his people of old and how they were freed from slavery in Egypt years and years ago. And he heard about the plagues, and he heard about the parting waters, and he heard about the deserts, and he heard about the manna. And I'm sure that he heard about the conquest of the promised land, about the crossing of the Jordan, and how battles like Jericho took place, and about the sun standing still. I'm sure he heard about those growing up. I'm sure he had knowledge of David and of Solomon, in times of victory, in times of peace, in times of progress, and heard stories about a young boy defeating a giant, and about the Ark of the Covenant, and about the temple being built. And I'm sure he had knowledge also of Jeroboam's rebellion and how it split the kingdom into Israel and into Judah. And Israel is now what he was responsible for. And I'm sure that through it all, he had this base knowledge of God, but the true worship of him was not fully in practice, because you see, Jehoash was brought up under his father's idol worship, and he himself held to. I'm sure he probably grew up hearing stories of his grandfather Jehu's revolution and how things changed for about 28 years when he was in rule, but Jehu wasn't around anymore. And Jehoash's father only reigned for 17 years, and those were tough times. And now here he is, severe oppression from Aram, this enemy army, and now he's looking around as a young man, and he's the captain of a sinking ship, wondering, what am I going to do? And have you ever felt like that? Have you ever felt like your kingdom is crashing down around you? That's where he was, and he's looking at everything and all that is lacking, and he realizes that his back is against the wall. It's an amazing thing, though, that when your back's against the wall, despite circumstances, despite what you know, what you don't know, a lot of times we recognize the godly people around us, don't we? Because despite the fact that his back was against the wall, this young man who, not fully even walking in the ways of the Lord, recognized something. He recognized that there's an old prophet and that this old prophet knows what to do. Because you see, you can never underestimate the power of a godly life. Because even the ungodly can recognize the power of the godly life. And Spurgeon said, "Dear friends, let us seek so to live that even ungodly men may miss us when we're gone." Because you see, you never know when your godly life and your faithfulness is going to be recognized by a younger generation. Grandfathers, grandmothers, fathers, mothers, aunts, and uncles, you never know when your godly life and faithfulness will be recognized in the lives of your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren. The people around you, your sphere of influence, they're watching your life. And undoubtedly, Jehoash knew the names Elijah and Elisha, and he knew that Elisha was still around, probably because he heard his grandfather Jehu talk about him. And so Jehoash recognizes a spiritual father. And this king of Israel went down to see this old prophet, and he wept over him. And he says this, he says, my father, he cried, the chariots and the horsemen of Israel. It's pretty interesting that he said this, because as Elisha saw Elijah taken up into heaven, he said the same thing. The same thing, my father, the chariots and the horsemen of Israel. Years before, Elisha said that as Elijah was be taken up into heaven, but it was in response to the revelation that he was experiencing. But here, Jehoash said it in response to the desolation that he was experiencing. The chariots and the horsemen of Israel were being wiped out. And it's amazing the spiritual drop-off that can happen between generations, and it points to the deep role that spiritual mothers and fathers play in the lives of upcoming generations. You are needed. You are needed in the lives of young people. Why did he recognize Elisha? Why? Because Elisha's reputation preceded him. Because Elisha walked with Elijah. He saw a lot of things when he followed Elijah around. He witnessed Elijah being taken to heaven. Elisha saw the Jordan part again. He saw water be purified. He instructed the widow and her oil. Elisha saw the Shunammite's son restored to life, and he saved prophets from poisonous stew. And he saw Naaman healed of leprosy, and he fed 100 people during a time of famine, and he recovered an axe head by making it float. He blinded and trapped an enemy army. He handled conflict, weathered sieges, disrupted corrupt rule, on and on and on. Elisha had a very extensive resume that proved God's faithfulness, and word had spread. Word had spread, and Jehoash recognized it, and he recognized that his back was against the wall, and so he came to Elisha and said, what do I do? Where do I go from here? And I want to tell you this morning that there is a young generation that's living with their backs against the wall. And the mindset of this generation was really summed up for me when a while back ago I saw a post on social media that simply said this. It said, I guess I just have to assume that everyone is a fake until they're proven real. And it tells of a generation that's untrusting. And it tells of a generation with their back against the wall. And it tells of a generation that really doesn't know. And they're insecure. And they're trying to figure this thing out. And they're asking, what do I do? And they're looking at their kingdom that's crashing down all around them. The broken families, the broken trust, the insecurity and the fear, the pressure from society, the weight of a sinful world pressing down, bearing down. And they're saying, what are we going to do? We could rattle off statistics. The thing is, as soon as you publish statistics, they change. We could point fingers and cast blame, but that doesn't bring about any solutions. We could make excuses, or we could just ignore everything. But here's the thing, all the while one generation is trying to figure out and identify a problem, the next one is just desperately looking for answers. And many times those answers come in very destructive ways when they're left to their own devices. And they're building walls around their hearts, and they're making very grown-up decisions at very young ages, and they're experiencing things that they shouldn't be experiencing as they're just trying to cope. And they're like Jehoash, looking around at what they're left with, and they're saying, I've got nothing to work with here. What do we do? Well, young people, you need to look to godly wisdom and experience. And in this passage, you'll see 4 things that a younger generation needs from the older generation. Because you see, older generation, you are needed. They need you desperately. And a lot of times they don't even really know how to articulate it. Why? Because they've been used to just kind of pulling themselves up by their proverbial bootstraps and try to figure this out on their own. Why? Because we have families that are in disarray. Why? Because we have basically the blind leading the blind when it comes to teen culture. They don't trust anybody else. So a lot of their advice they're getting from each other. And they don't even really need to, they don't really even know how to say what they need. They know that they want respect and they want room, but here's the thing: if we leave them to just make it on their own, it's trouble, and we've seen that. And so they need an older generation to step up to the plate and say, all right, you know what? I've got some things to offer you, because they might not be articulating it right now, but they're really truly asking, what do I do? Where do I turn? So there's some things in the passage that Elisha offers this young king that I want to share with you. First off, the younger generation needs to be armed for the road ahead. Needs to be armed for the road ahead. Now, Elisha was suffering from the illness from which he died, and Jehoash, king of Israel, went down to see him. And in the verse 15, after Jehoash cries out, Elisha said, go get a bow and some arrows. He arms him for the road ahead. Jehoash knew that there was trouble on the horizon. He knew he didn't have a lot to work with. And he's crying out, what do I do? And Elisha arms him. He equips him. A young generation needs to be well armed and equipped with the weapons and the tools of success of the fathers. Let me tell you this, young people. At this point in your life, you need to seek out the spiritual fathers and mothers. You need to go find them. You need to check the spiritual resumes. You need to check the resumes of those that are in the room. Why? Because their resumes are telling of wisdom and experience. Their resumes are telling you the story of God's faithfulness. You need to go seek them out. And as an older generation, would you display that? Would you display it plainly? Would you tell your story? Would you hold out what God's given you to a generation coming up behind you? Recognize this, young people, that there are ministers, missionaries, pastors, leaders in this room. There's government officials. There's educators. There's leading businessmen, men and women in this community sitting here in this room. There's entrepreneurs. There's mothers. There's fathers. There's grandmothers, grandfathers, musicians, artists, builders, woodworkers, hunters, computer techs, writers, professors. We could go on and on and on and on. And that's the beauty of being part of the church, that in this room, there's such a wide variety of professions and people and ways of looking at life and experience that's represented here, that's available to you. And would you just get up enough courage to humbly ask, what do I do? And fathers and mothers, can you offer what you have, the knowledge you have, to equip them? There's some young men and women that are going into business in the future. I can't tell you how priceless a cup of coffee would be. As you talk to them about leading with business and right ethics and how to set things up and just the knowledge you have. There's future missionaries sitting here, and there's missionaries that you've retired and now you've seen the world, you've been there, you've experienced things. They need to hear your stories. And this isn't even just a teenage thing, but there's struggling young mothers that need to hear from older mothers on advice on how to raise kids and how to not go crazy. There's so much to this, but the thing is as an older generation, can you look at what God's given you and what He's equipped you with and the experience that He's added to your life, and can you willingly hold it out and say, look, this can arm you for the road ahead? And younger generation, can you take a look at your life and maybe, yeah, there's some lack, but realize you don't know it all right now, and humbly go to those that have gone before you and ask for help. And when the two of those come together, it's a beautiful thing. And can we take it beyond the physical things of money giving and taking away and professional life, and get down to the story of God and the fabric of our very being? and equip these teens with helping them flesh out what it means to pray, to know the word and apply the word. A lifestyle of worship, what it means to fast and the power of it. What it means to live a spirit-filled, empowered life. Can we take it beyond just the practical and get down to the vision of this church where we reach with care and we nurture with word and teach a younger generation to worship with passion? I'm so excited about this new building that's going up for the Element and what it's going to mean. I'm excited because it's not just about a building. It's about building lives. It's not just about physical brick and mortar. It's more than that. It's an equipping facility to lay the brick and mortar, building the next generation. We need your help. We need your help to equip them, to arm them for the road ahead. So they need help by being armed for the road ahead. Secondly, the younger generation needs to be affirmed through your support. They need that. They need that affirmation. They need to know that you're with them. And in verse 15, he said, take a bow and some arrows. There's that equipping, and he did so. In 16, he says, take the bow in your hands. He said to the king of Israel, and when he had taken it, and this is huge, Elisha put his hands on the king's hands. What a picture right there. Where you've got the wisdom and experience of this older prophet who's now on his deathbed. He can't do what he used to do. He can't go where he used to go. But he knows. He's got experience. He knows what it is to walk with God. And here you have this king who's full of energy and vitality, but he's scared of what's ahead, and he's unsure, and he doesn't have the wisdom and the experience. But when you see the two come together, and the power that's there, and the affirmation that's there, and the blessing that's there, the younger generation needs to be affirmed through your support. Elisha basically gets up, rolls up his sleeves, and gets involved with this young king. Hand on hand. There's power there. There's power there. When you look at a young man or a young woman and you choose to literally roll up your sleeves and get involved in their life, as you're equipping them, you're not just equipping them and saying, here you go, but you're with them in the moment. It's the difference between a travel agent and a tour guide. Because you can see, you can have a travel agent that'll set everything up. You'll have a travel agent that'll put everything together and give you a package and say, here you go, have fun. Or you can have a tour guide that's going to walk with you, that's going to show you things, that's going to help add to the entire experience. We need the generations to come together where there's this life on life, this affirmation, this blessing, this support, where they can literally feel the presence of fathers and mothers around them. Because you see, an over-digitized generation that we have now needs to feel the literal presence of the mothers and the fathers. Because the constant connection has now become the new disconnection. I remember at one point sitting in a restaurant, it became so clear to me. I'm eating with my family, and I noticed this table of two, and it was obviously a grandmother and maybe a grandson, and they're sitting there trying to have lunch together. And I saw the grandmother continue to try to engage the grandson in conversation, and the entire time he's looking on his phone. One word, short answers. Yes, okay, sure. And at one point, he just got up and left. Didn't leave his phone at the table, though. And I remember seeing this picture being played out and the frustration of the grandmother and the disconnect of the grandson, but yet he was connected with everybody else he wanted to be connected with. And here's the thing, we're so connected now that we're disconnected. I want to tell you that the power of face-to-face is rising like never before. And the church can capitalize on that. The fathers and the mothers in the room here can capitalize on that. And young generation, I want to tell you, put the phone down. Guess what? The replies can wait, okay? The status stuff can wait. It can wait. It really can. But here's the thing. You can't miss the moments that are offered to you. You can't miss the moments where there's life on life. You can't miss the moments where you're looking for help and you've got somebody that's got wisdom and experience that can equip your life, that can come alongside you. Everything else can wait. Soak up that moment. Why? Because it's building your life, but it also takes an older generation that's willing to do that. Maybe you don't feel like you used to, and maybe you don't feel like things are going like you once had them going, but here's the thing, can you still get up? And can you still equip? And can you still take your godly hands that are anointed and put them on the lives of a younger generation and come alongside them and offer support, offer words of wisdom because they need it? So not only did Elisha arm the king for the road ahead, and not only did he affirm through support, but he helped the king take aim. The younger generation needs to take aim with purpose. Elisha puts his hands on the king's hands, and in verse 17 he says, "Open the east window," he said, and he opened it. "Shoot," Elisha said, and he shot. The Lord's arrow of victory, the arrow of victory over Aram, Elisha declared, "He will completely destroy the Arameans at Apec." He gave him direction. The wise prophet gave the young king direction. And I've seen this generation many times marked by kind of aimless wandering. They need direction from the fathers and the mothers. There's a lot of wandering with this extended adolescence nowadays. Times aren't like they used to where, at post-high school, all of a sudden you got a job and you got married, or maybe you went to college and things just fell categorically in order. Things have extended now well into mid-20s. People aren't getting married as young as they used to. They're taking longer going to college. The decisions on their careers, there's more time there, and because of that, there's a lot of wandering around there. Here's the thing. I've seen this, that this younger generation needs help when it comes to taking aim with purpose, because I've encountered a lot of young men especially that are just drawing back their bow and arrow of life and taking a shot at something and figuring, well, I guess I'll just draw a bullseye around there because I don't know what else to do. And instead of living with purpose and living under divine destiny, they're just kind of going with whatever and wherever and just hoping for the best. I want to tell you that you can help them take aim. Elisha said, "Open the window, look to the east. Let's point this way, and let's bind together hand on hand." And I want to tell you that arrow that was shot had more power and surety than if that king had drawn back by himself. You can help a generation take aim. And most of them just need to know that they actually have a shot. Most young people I've met just need to know from somebody with wisdom, experience, and a love for them. They just need to know that they do have a shot. Because a lot of teenagers I've met are looking through the lens of their lack. They're looking through the lens of being overwhelmed. They're looking through the lens of not knowing what to do, where to go, and trying to figure this out on their own. Why don't you, as an older generation, open a window of direction and opportunity? Put your hands on them and affirm them. Equip them for the life ahead. Give them the direction that they need. Say, look this way. Number one, look towards Jesus. Look towards the Word of God that is a lamp unto our feet, light unto our path. Let them know that the direction they take, they don't have to lean on just their own understanding. They've got more that's available to them. They've got Christ. So you've got Elisha, and he's going through this progression with this young king, and he equips him, he arms him for the road ahead, and he affirms him and puts his hands on him and helps him take aim with purpose. Fourthly, he helps his king understand that it's time to go all in. The younger generation needs to know what it means to be all in. And Elisha coaches this young king. He coaches him beyond what he's told to do to what he's supposed to do. He tells him in verse 18, he said, "Take the arrows." And the king took them, and Elisha told him, "Strike the ground." And he struck it 3 times and stopped. The man of God was angry with him and said, "You should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times, and you would have defeated Aram and completely destroyed it. But now you will defeat it only 3 times. And that verse used to frustrate me when I would read it in times past, because I was like, well, you didn't tell him how many times to strike the ground, and now you're angry with him. And the more I read it, and the more I let my heart soak in, and I realized that Elisha was trying to teach this king that it's not about just going through the motions. It's not about just doing just what you're told to do and directed to do. It's about being who you're supposed to be and doing what you're supposed to do. He was teaching him about going all in, about breaking the back of the enemy that's coming against him. And I want to tell you, an insecure generation needs to see the fire in the eyes of the fathers. Because you see, Elisha got angry with them, and that's okay. Why? Because there's a thing called tough love. And every now and then, we got to administer some tough love. We got to administer some coaching, some instruction, and some correction. In older generation, these young people need to see the fire in your eyes when it comes to living, because they need to know that seemingly small actions have huge consequences, and that there truly is a fight to be had. And it's going to take tenacity. It's going to take follow through. It's going to take getting up and straightening up your backbone and walking with confidence. And you can't settle for short-term victories. You've got to go for complete victories. They can't quit. They've got to know all this. Why? Because it's worth it. Why? Because there's a battle that's raging for their souls. Why? Because the backbone of sin has got to be broken in their lives. They can't just manage it. They can't just manage it, and nothing's going to speak to them like a grandfather or a grandmother, somebody with wisdom and experience that they respect, looking them eyeball to eyeball and saying, you can do this, but it's going to take you going all in, you not quitting, and if I can make it, you can make it. And when they have those heart-to-heart conversations and they see your life and your spiritual resume and what God's brought you through, and they hear your story and they begin to catch it and they begin to understand it, guess what? It's going to turn into a mentality that will not quit, and that's what they need. That's what they need. At the core of it all, they need Jesus just like the rest of us. They need to know that this is a serious thing, that life is nothing to play with. And that Jesus has to be the center of it all. They need to know that there's a Savior that paid a price for their sins, and that His grace and mercy and love is available to all of us. And they need to know that Jesus' death on the cross and burial in the ground and 3 days later being raised to life and ascending to the right hand of the Father opened a door for all of us to receive salvation. And Jesus, that soon coming King, is coming back again for His people. You need to help them understand that and to know that they don't have to live under siege anymore to the ways and the habits and the attitudes and the values of the world that they see around them, that Jesus came so that they could have life and life more abundantly. So what do they need? Older generation, they need you to communicate that passionately to them. As the Azusa Street revival swept up the West Coast, it reached a little logging town in Darrington, Washington. It's where my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather were living. Set up tent meetings and revivals, and my grandmother happened to go to one of those. She got saved. She received Christ. Wasn't raised in a Christian household. Didn't know a thing about Jesus. Met Jesus there. Completely changed everything. And her husband received Christ, and they stopped drinking, they stopped smoking, they stopped all that other stuff, and knew that something had changed inside them, and that Jesus was He was the center of it all now. And my great-grandmother felt a call to preach the gospel. So what'd she do? She went and she bought an accordion. And she got something to stand on. And she literally went street corner to street corner and stood on a soapbox and played songs on her accordion and preached the word of God to anybody that would listen. And that led them to Everett, Washington, and led them to planting a church and building a church and ministering to young men that were coming through Everett on their way out to the Pacific during the World War. They'd preach and they would minister. As a young man, and I know not everybody has this opportunity, but as a young man, I had the privilege of being able to sit in my great-grandmother's house time and time again. I knew two things were going to happen anytime I went to visit my great-grandmother. One, I was going to get a cup of blueberries. She always had blueberries. And two, I was going to hear an incredible story. And at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, even up to 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, I loved to spend time with my great-grandmother because I saw a fire in her eyes. And at this point in her late 80s and into her early 90s, she couldn't get around like she used to. Most of the time, she sat in an easy chair. And she'd putter around the house a little bit. She couldn't get up and go like she used to. But she'd tell me these stories. And when she told me these stories, there was a glint in her eye that was absolutely undeniable. There was a fire there, and she came alive in a different way as she was relaying stories of miracles, and she was relaying stories of God's provision, and she was relaying stories of what God did and what she saw, and things that the ways that God had healed people in our family, and the ways that God brought people to Jesus in different scenarios. It would just pour out of her, and I couldn't help but sit there and listen to it. And I was captivated by what God did through her and the fire in her eyes as she was telling me this. And it lit something inside of me saying that, you know what? This is more than just a story. This is more. She believes this. She's passionate about this. This is her communicating the very fabric of who she is and what she's about. And I saw Jesus inside of her. And as a young boy, it formed who I was. I wouldn't be standing here today if it wasn't for a great-grandmother, an older generation communicating what God did to me, and it got into my heart, and now I can't walk away from it. I can't deny it. I'm all in. Why? Because an older generation was all in and said, look, you've got to be all in. Why? Because it's worth it. Why? Because Jesus is worth it. Why? Because if you're all in, guess what? His love, His grace, His mercy, it's going to carry you. You're not going to have it figured out all the time. You're not going to have all the answers all the time, but you just be faithful and Jesus is going to be there. I learned that at a young age. And here's the thing. I saw the fire in her eyes. And you better believe that my daughter and my sons are going to see the fire in mine. That my grandkids are going to see the fire in my eyes. I might not be able to get around like I once did, but they're going to see it. And that my great-grandkids are going to see the fire in my eyes. And it might be like an old prophet that can't get around anymore, can't do what he used to do, but they're going to hear story after story. And they're going to have a great-grandfather that's going to equip them. They're going to have a great-grandfather that's going to rise up, put his hands on them, and bless them and affirm them. That's going to open windows of opportunity and give them direction. That's going to tell them the importance of being all in. So what's this younger generation need? They need you. They need you. Not just your checks. They need you. Not just you filling a room. They need you. They need your stories. They need you to arm them for the road ahead with the experience that you have. They need you to affirm them and offer support. Come alongside them. Literally get your hands around them. They need you. They need you to help them take aim. Open windows of opportunity. Help them see differently. So many of these teenagers, I've found that their breakthrough is just a perspective shift away. They're looking through a lens of lack and what's gone wrong. But if you can help them shift their perspective, open a window, things change. They need you to help them know how to be all in and why it's worth it. Because Jesus is worth it. They need you to tell. We will tell. Let's tell. And while we tell, I beg you, let them see the fire in your eyes. Let them see the fire in your eyes. Why? Because there are so many things out there that want to argue facts and figures and scriptures, and so many philosophies and different things that are attacking them, their hearts and minds. But they cannot argue with your life and your story and what God's done and the passion that you're living with. Let them see the fire in your eyes.